Our banking system is sound.
In the past 2 weeks, serious difficulties at a small number of banks have emerged.
These banks are safe.
All depositors' savings in the banking system are safe.
The banking system in the United States is sound and resilient.
Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound and resilient.
A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, the second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
The Silicon Valley Bank collapse is the worst since 2008.
Social Security is structurally sound.
As president, I will not cut one penny from Social Security or Medicare.
There's an imminent disaster waiting. I mean, that's where we're headed.
2 balls, 2 strikes to Bryce Harper. Suarez delivers. Swing and a drive. Left field. It's deep. It's going. Yes! And it is gone. Yes! It is bedlam at the bank as Bryce Harper has put the Phillies on top.
Thank you for tuning in to podcast number 7 of Bogus Banks, Behemoth Bubbles, and Baseball Betting. I'm your host, Chase Goldman, and today is Thursday, November the 20th, 2025. Wanted to pick up where we left off on the last one. If you've been following along, I don't have one good podcast that really covers the entire thesis of this short position. But I think I caught them casting a spell on CNBC the other morning. We're going to go into details about that later. And I think I know when the market's going to bottom. I'm assuming it's probably going to drop about 90% because the 1929 stock market crash had a drawdown of 89%. And then the dot-com market crash saw NASDAQ crash, I think it was 82 or 87%. Those were both multi-year drawdowns with some horrendous bear market rallies in the interim that each lasted, I think, over 6 months. So I'm trying to be ready for that. But, you know, just to go over a little bit of baseball for those that are tuning in for baseball, the majority of this podcast is going to be about the Behemoth bubble. And I think that bubble is definitely being popped right now by the witches that really run this world. So just to set the table, right now today, we have subprime auto loan delinquencies are at an all-time high. Auto repossessions are also at an all-time high. Margin debt is $1 trillion. That's, in other words, people trading on margin with their brokerage accounts at Schwab or wherever, all-time high. Credit card debt, all-time high, $1.23 trillion. FreightWaves is reporting that long-haul trucking volumes are down 25% year over year. That's not a very bullish indicator for this economy. Student loan delinquencies are near all-time highs. The corporate financial press is now debating, is this a bubble or is this not a bubble? I can tell you right now, if they're even debating that on TV, you better get the hell out of these markets and you better get out of them right now, because I guarantee you, they don't talk about shit like that unless it's just they can't avoid it, okay? We're also seeing weekly cockroaches now. Tricolor First Brands, the newest one I think is Blue Owl Capital. We're seeing those every week now, guys. Just fraud on top of fraud on top of fraud. Office commercial real estate delinquencies are at all-time highs. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 make up 42% of the S&P 500's market cap. That's an all-time high for breadth in the markets. 40 to 45% of the components that make up the Russell 2000 are unprofitable. Michael Burry has capitulated. He closed down his Scion investment firm. And he was the guy from The Big Short, in case you're not familiar, Michael Burry. And then, of course, for this roaring economy, Trump wants $2,000 tariff rebate checks and 50-year mortgages for the strongest economy ever. So, the indicators of a recession are just everywhere you look. Unless you're watching CNBC all day, they barely talk about this stuff, if they even talk about it at all. But I want to just recap what we went over on the last podcast and then what I saw this week on CNBC 2 days ago, again with Andrew Ross Sorkin. So just to go back and let you guys know, you should know, maybe a lot of you don't, but the numbers 9 and 11 are very important to the witches that run this world. The 9 represents the end of an era. The 1 represents new beginnings, or a beginning of a new era. So those are very, very important numbers to these witches that run the world. I do know that much. If I would also recommend anybody that, if you need some good listening material, check out Crow 777. That's w777.com. He's got some amazing stuff on his podcast. But that's where I've learned most of what I've learned about these things with the encoding. But the Satanists and the witches, they love to use reverse images. So back in the 1980s, we were hearing about backmasking, and that was where if you played the song backwards, you'd hear satanic lyrics and stuff like that. I believe all that stuff was true, but that's how they do their shit. So when we look at the album cover on Supertramp, right above the Twin Towers, they've got the top of the U, which looks like year 11, and then P looks like a backwards 9. So if you reverse the whole image, and that's what they do in witchcraft, is that they like to use the opposite. So where the truth is wrong and the wrong is truth. Lies are true and the truth is lies. That's what witches do, and they're having a field day here on Earth right now. But the 9/11 are very, very important to these people. In fact, the two biggest world events that have happened in my lifetime both encoded those numbers. We had COVID-19, the 1/9, and we also had 9/11. So just throwing that out there. If you want to go back and re-listen to my podcast number, I believe it was number 5. On number 5, I went over all the weird anomalies like the Eyes of Darkness with Dean Koontz, where he wrote a book back in 1981 that almost predicted word for word what we saw with the COVID pandemic, where a virus causes a worldwide pandemic after it escapes from a bioweapons lab in China, but not just anywhere in China. It was Wuhan, China. And the book is set in the futuristic setting, and the year was, you guessed it, 2020. Those stories, I've got, 20, 25 of them. And also there was the amount of foreshadowing that they did on the big event on September 11th, 2001. It was in the movies, books, album covers, cartoons. It was everywhere. They foreshadowed that. They didn't, if you knew to look for it, you would have seen it. And after it happens, I can see it clearly, although most people will just shout coincidence every time they see that shit. Listen, if you don't think witches are running this world, I got a bridge to sell you. Klaus Schwab, the guy that started the World Economic Forum, who's already told us by 2030 you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That guy dresses up in some kind of weird Star Trek uniform. Hopefully you guys have seen that picture and you know what I'm talking about. But the guy's a witch, along with Elon Musk. He dresses up. He I guess it was a couple years ago. He went to a Halloween party in some kind of $50,000 satanic worshiping Satan outfit, and then he made that his profile picture on his Twitter profile for months. And I'm telling you, normal people don't do that kind of shit. Okay, but yeah, they're just trust me, the witches are running this world, and the stock market is completely freaking fake. So anyway, let's go back and recap what we went over on the last episode. On the last episode, the one before last, maybe it might have been episode 5, we talked about how on October 28th of this year, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who is a member of Club OJ, and I'm not saying that everybody in Club OJ is in on it, certainly not, but I do know that the witches are more prevalent in that organization, along with another one, maybe the Jesuits and probably the Freemasons. And if you look at the Freemasons, another big number in this. So they love this numerology shit, and the number 33 is very, very prevalent with them. That's the highest level of attainment that you can obtain in the Freemasons. 33rd degree Freemason, 33rd degree. What do they call it? 33rd degree Freemason. That's what they call it. And I think that's on the Scottish Rite. On the other one, it's only 32. But regardless, when you look at 33, that has significance for them because, remember, a third of the angels rebelled against God and were cast down to the earth. So that number 33, you'll see it in a lot of things too. So just be on the lookout for that when you see news headlines. You'll see it a lot more often than you should if it was just random. But we wanted to go over the ringing of the bell. Nobody rings a bell. That's an old saying in the investment world, that when the market tops, nobody rings a bell. Well, they literally rang a bell for us on October the 28th. Andrew Ross Sorkin has a new book out, and that's the cover story for the normies. Look, he's just out there promoting his book, so he got to ring the bell. But when he rang the bell of the New York Stock Exchange on the morning of October 28th, he was standing in front of a giant, huge, massive sign that talked about a stock market crash. And it wasn't just any stock market crash, it was the 1929 stock market crash. Now, the top in that market was on September 3rd, 1929. But if you look at when it actually crashed, it had three big crashes in October. There was on the Thursday, October 24th, it dropped 11% on the intraday and finished the day down 2%. I'm not sure what happened on Friday, but then the following Monday was what they call Black Monday. So you had Black Thursday, Black Monday, I think the markets went down 11%, and then on Black Tuesday, they went down another 13%. And so if you ask Google when did the stock market crash in 1929, it's going to tell you October. So there we have it, October 1929. That's 10/29, okay? Now, the day after Andrew Ross Sorkin of Club OJ, the day after he rings this opening bell, all three major stock market indexes hit their all-time intraday highs on October the 29th. That is another 10/29. So they're telling us in advance. If you have eyes that see and you can figure this out, 10/29, October 1929, and then we had October 29th, 2025. 10/29, 10/29. Now, I was short the market last week when the Dow ripped right through its previous all-time high. But I realized if there's anything we could learn from Back to the Future, please go back and listen to that episode 5. It'll explain all that in a lot more detail, how I arrive at these conclusions. But with Back to the Future, every time the DeLorean would hit 88 miles per hour, which, by the way, for these witches, that symbolizes infinity. If you Google what is the symbol for infinity, you'll see it's an 8. So 88 miles an hour symbolizes infinity for these people. It was, if it didn't go into time travel right then and there and leave those flaming tire tracks in its wake, if it didn't go in to time travel at that instant, it would have always run into some sort of film or an object that had a lot of eyeballs on it, okay? So if you think about the very first time he goes into time travel, he's running right into that Fox photo thing. Because remember, back in the 1980s, they would set up a little, basically like a phone booth in the parking lot. It was a little bit bigger than a regular phone booth, but there were film development places where you would take your film, you would drop it off with them, and then come back a few hours later or a day later and pick it up. And so in the movie Back to the Future, he's on his way. And by the way, that 9/11 was encoded all over that movie. So and that movie was recorded in 1985. And remember, the producer of that movie, Robert Zemeckis. There's a scene in the movie where Marty says to Doc he had slipped the warning of a future Muslim terrorist attack into Doc's coat pocket, and Doc finds it during the rainstorm in 1955, and he says, "What's the meaning of this?" And Marty says, "Find out in 30 years." Well, Robert Zemeckis made that movie in 1985, and 30 years later, in 2015, he came out with another movie called The Walk, which was about the Twin Towers, okay? And that kind of concretes all that 9/11 symbolism that we saw during the movie Back to the Future. But where was I going with this? My point that I was trying to make was every time that DeLorean would go into time travel, it was always headed into the thing that would have all the eyeballs on it. It was the Fox film thing in the parking lot where they developed the film. And then in 1955, in that town, he was going to the movie theater. If he wouldn't have hit 88 miles an hour, if you look at those flaming tire tracks in that scene, if he doesn't enter time travel, he's going to crash into the movie theater. And then in a subsequent episode, because remember they made 3 of them, it was a trilogy. But in the last one, or maybe the one before, maybe it was part 2, I don't know. But in one of them, there was another one where he was at a drive-in movie theater. And again, if he doesn't hit 88 miles an hour, he's going to run right into the screen, of the drive-in movie theater. So that what I'm saying is that's where people's attention is focused. So I was watching the Dow initially because I don't know why I chose the Dow, But once the Dow blasted right through those former all-time highs that were set on October 29th, I realized, well, NASDAQ and S&P 500 were still well below those former all-time highs. So I wanted to stay in the market because I know now, after doing a little bit of research, that the focus of humanity is no longer on the Dow. It is now on the S&P 500. So that is where everyone's attention is focused, and that's the index I wanted to make my bet on. So it still stands. If we get a new all-time intraday high on the S&P 500, I'm going to close out my short position and I'm done with this trade. I don't think that's going to happen. The market came in today and they gaslighted us with, NVIDIA came in with their fake earnings again last night and all their round tripping accounting that, the AI bros just refuse to see because, I don't know, they're just blind. It's so obvious. This is totally .com 2000 April all over again, but this one's going to be far, far worse. And whether or not the United States can print their way out of this one with the dollar, that remains to be seen. I'm betting against it. I don't think they will be able to. But regardless, we had that all-time high was set on October 29th. We have not breached it yet. And what else was there I wanted to go over on this? I'm grasping at straws here. There was, the October 29th, the 1029. That's all we needed to talk about. But then the other morning, now realize I live in Puerto Rico. I flew home to my house in Texas. So I'm still on Puerto Rico time, and I'm waking up super early in the mornings. So the other morning, two days ago, I woke up, and I was just curious. I wonder if they have programming this early on CNBC, or if they're like rerunning, some sort of, buy this or buy that, 30-minute infomercials. So I turned it on, and they were live. Andrew Ross Sorkin and Joe Kernan were in there, and they brought in a guest. And the next thing I know, they're holding up Andrew Ross Sorkin's book about the 1929 stock market crash. It's on the screen. It's on TV again. And so that got my attention. I started watching. And they had a guest on the show who was also promoting a book. This guy's name was Oz Perlman. So, that's interesting. That got my attention because I'm thinking Oz. Now, I wonder if that's his real name. I still don't know. I think chat did tell me that is his real name. He's from Israel. But it reminds me a lot of the Wizard of Oz. Regardless, Oz Perlman is an admitted magician. Okay, now a magician is a sorcerer, is a witch. It's all the same damn thing. Whether they realize they're in witchcraft or not, I guarantee they are. And this guy probably knows. But anyway, he comes in there promoting his book. And what he does is he starts talking about if you knew the first and the last. Wow, that's weird. That comes in with like 1 and 9, doesn't it? Beginning and ending. Okay. He comes in with that. He said that during his little tirade on CNBC. And then he gives Andrew Ross Sorkin a paperback copy of his 1929 stock market crash book. And he also gives Joe Kernan a copy of his paperback book that he's releasing now and promoting. He says, okay, just thumb through those books and, find the page that is calling your name and hold it close to your body. So they each thumb through it for a second, and they each hold, an open book up against their chest. And he says, okay, now, Andrew, I want you to make note of what is the very first word on your page. And then I want you to remember that word and close the book. So Andrew does that. And then he goes to Joe Kernan. He says, I want you to do the same. I want you to memorize the last word on the page. And then I want you to close the book and memorize that word. Then he says, okay, now let's go. I want you to pick a letter from the middle. And I'm going to count down from 3. And when I get to 3, 2, 1, I want you to each recite that number. And so he goes 3, 2, 1, and they both blurt out G at the exact same time. And then they look at each other. And whether or not they were acting, I don't know. I get the feeling he was actually conducting witchcraft up there, and these magicians, maybe they really can do this stuff. But anyway, they both act, if they were acting, they're pretty good actors. I give them that. So they both say G, and then he says, now here's what I want you to do. Let me back up. I forgot. I left out the biggest part of this, guys. Before he does this, he asked Joe Kernan to pick a year, any year in the next 10 years. And Joe Kernan picks, by random, 2027. And then he turns over to Andrew Ross Sorkin, right? And he says, I want you to pick a date. So Andrew Ross Sorkin picks the random date of July 6th. And then he goes into the whole thing about open the book, find the page that's calling your name. That's how this went down, okay? So that's how it went down. And then he wrote down the date on a giant piece of poster board with a magic marker. He writes down 7/06/27, but he doesn't put the 0 in front of the 7, just the 7 and the 06 and the 27, all right? So he writes that down, and then he says, all right, now here's what I want you to do, Joe and Andrew. He gives them each a piece of poster board, and he says, use these markers and write down the first word that has a middle letter of G, right? Write down your word, and Joe Kernan, you do the same. You write down the last word from your page. And so they both write down their word, and then he pulls up his poster board that has 7/06/27, and he flips it around and flips it upside down, and he says, that's your word, isn't it? And then they both hold up theirs, and all three of these posters read legal. Legal, 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 okay? So what are they telling us? I think what they're telling us is this stock market crash ends, the bottom will be in on July 6, 2027. I think it'll drop about 90%. I'm going to cover my shorts before that in case I'm wrong. I might hold out for 80, 85. And I'm going to add to my shorts as I go. I found out this week because I've never really tried to just push the pedal to the metal with a short position before like I am right now because I'm very much convinced that I'm onto something. But I found out, so I was short QQQ. And then what I found out was you can marry a call to your short position. And so your options buying power goes up a lot when you do that. So basically, if you have, let's say, I don't know, let's call it $10,000 of buying power. And then, well, let's use a better number. Let's use $200,000 of buying power. And then you short 100 shares of QQQ. That's a $62,000 or $60,000 short position. So your options buying power is going to go down a lot. But if you'll buy one call with a strike that's pretty close to the current price, say a couple months out, which is what I did, then you get most of that options buying power comes back. So you can really, really push this thing hard if you want to. I'm not recommending that anybody else do this because I might be wrong. I very well could be wrong. I don't know shit about witchcraft. I just know that the 9s and 1s are very important to them because I really researched the shit out of 9/11 years ago. So remember, he had Andrew Ross Sorkin read off the first word on his page. Joe Kernan read the last. There's your first and your last. And he also brought up if you knew the beginning and the end or something like that early in the presentation. So there's your 9 and your 1 right there. 9 represents the end, 1 represents the beginning, first and last, right? And then not only that, towards the end of the entire segment, Andrew Ross Sorkin says, well, email us your thoughts and maybe somebody out there can break this. And why would he use the word break, as in we're going to break a spell? Interesting. But not only that, it was on November the 18th. So you have your 11, and then you have 1 plus 8. 18 equals 9. So you have your 9 and your 1 encoded there again. And then also July 6th, that does add up to 13. And that's important to these people, also these witches. As you know, most buildings don't even have a floor 13 due to superstition. I think the market will bottom on July 6, 2027. You can put me on record for predicting that, I guess, if I'm reading this right. And then the other thing that's got me kind of concerned is the fact that they would come up with legal. What are they trying to communicate there? Now, if he didn't have that 1929 book on about the stock market crash, Andrew Ross Sorkin's book on the set with him that morning, I probably just would have ignored all this. I don't think I would have noticed any of it. But the fact that they incorporated that book after they told us on the 28th, the 29th is going to be the high. It's time to go short. That's what I'm betting on. I'm going to try it and see how it goes. And I'm up a lot of money right now. So this morning, Nvidia came in with their earnings, or last night, and the market just, like they always do. Oh, this is so great. Everything's wonderful. Then I actually listened to Jim Cramer for about 90 seconds on CNBC this morning, right after the market opened. And I was about to vomit with that guy. I cannot stand that. Oh, God, I can't stand that guy. And he was talking about the round tripping. That's all. They can just go away now that all these concerns about a bubble no longer, because look at, and NASDAQ was up this morning. It was up 650 points about an hour after the market opened. I saw it start coming back down, and I added to my short position. I shorted 100 more shares of QQQ and bought one call to marry that with. And I'm going to ride this out. But I think I'm going to win this. I think I'm going to make millions on this trade. We'll see how it goes, but that's what I'm betting on. How far the market goes down is anyone's guess. Will it really bottom on July 6th? I don't know. But the word legal, there was a book that had come out recently. I started hearing it on podcasts maybe a year or two ago. Let me think. The guy's name that wrote it was David Webb. Oh, it was called The Great Taking. And what The Great Taking is about is how they've had all the legislation passed to basically stiff depositors and banks that are over the limit on the FDIC. So a lot of people don't know this. Prior to the Great Financial Crisis, as long as you had under $100,000 in your checking account, if the bank failed, the FDIC would make you whole. That's the guarantee from the FDIC. During the GFC, there were so many problems that they increased that limit to $250,000. And for the SIPC, it's a very similar guarantee, but that's for your brokerage trading account. And that limit today is $500,000, unless it's all in cash. If you have it in cash, your limit is only $250,000. But if it's invested in, equities, call options, that sort of thing, bonds, whatever, it's going to be guaranteed up to $500,000, and that's your limit. Beyond that, you're on your own. Now, I am smart enough to realize that if they were to allow the too big to fail banks to actually fail, every corporation in the United States would go bankrupt immediately because they'd lose all their working capital. It'd be just vanished. It'd be gone. Whether they've got it in money market funds or in checking accounts at banks, their cash and equivalents are gone. So the whole idea that would actually happen, it's hard for me to believe, but they did hold up that word legal. So just to protect myself, I'm really going to consider, I have all my assets in one account. And it's easy to get into that one account. I only have to log into one account and make a trade. But there is a way that you can go through this ATAX system. And you can go to another broker, and most of them are synced up with this ATAX. So even if you're short and you hold some options, some stocks, mutual funds, you can transfer. You don't have to have a taxable event. You don't have to sell and go into cash and move that over to the other brokerage account through the ATAX system. I think that's what it was. It might have been ACATS. I don't remember. But you can just transfer that money and spread it out to 10 different accounts. The nightmare that I see is if you want to make a trade and go all in, you got to log into all 10 accounts again, and that sounds like an ass beating. So just the fact that they held up the poster board with the word legal on it, that's what bothers me. I think a too big to fail institution like Schwab or Fidelity or Chase, Wells Fargo, I just can't see them letting those guys fail. But I will tell you, there was a small bank in Lindsay, Oklahoma a year ago, October of 2024. That bank failed, and they did not do a bailout. They did a bail-in on that one. There was a guy that had a manufacturing business down there in Lindsay. His name, I forgot his name. I was going to call him. I wanted to look him up and call him and talk to him. But this guy was over the limit. There was an article about him. He had $400,000 in his business checking account, and he lost $150,000 of that because they did not bail him out. So it is a risk. It is a risk. I can't see them doing it because, well, if you talk about the Great Reset, which the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab in his weird Satan uniform, I don't know if I've already talked about this on this podcast because I get confused with what I'm talking about, but that guy, I guarantee he's a witch along with Elon Musk. They dress up in those weird Satan uniforms. Normal people don't do that shit. And, the World Economic Forum has talked about this Great Reset. What the hell is it? What are they going to do? I have no idea. But one thing we do know is that they've told us that by 2030, we'll own nothing and we'll be happy, along with The Simpsons. Back in 2000, they had the episode Bart to the Future, where Lisa Simpson is elected president, and she's making her inauguration speech. And she says, thanks to the economic disaster left behind for us by President Trump. How bad is it, Secretary Van Houten? And Milhouse comes running in with a chart of a crashing stock market. And he says, we're broke. So what's the best way to control the people? Take their wealth. And I got a feeling that's what they're going to be trying to do here. So I encourage everybody who has the time. It's a 40 or 44-minute podcast, episode number 5. I go over all these stories like that. There's one right after another, how everything was written about before it happened, like the Titanic, all these things. 12 years before the Titanic happened, there was a book. I think it was I can't remember the name exactly right off the top of my head, something about the Great Titan. It was a ship that was the same size as the Titanic. It was unsinkable. It was on its maiden voyage, same route, sank in the same place in the North Atlantic, too few lifeboats, lots of people died. These stories keep happening over and over and over again, and I got a feeling this is going to be one of those big coincidences where, 1929, 10/29, October 29th, market peaks, and then they had that little witchcraft thing yesterday or 2 days ago on CNBC. I think the market's going to bottom on July 6, 2027. We will find out. But if they do the Great Reset, they would have to, I can't even imagine how that would work. I think they'll bail them out. I think the too big to fail banks are going to be bailed out. But why are they not bailing out the small ones like that bank in Lindsay, Oklahoma? That's the question that I don't have an answer to. But one last thing I want to go over with you guys is artificial intelligence. So AI. Again, we know that the 9 and the 1 are very important to these witches. A is the first letter in most alphabets. I is the 9th letter in most alphabets. There's your 1 and your 9. And now you have all these witches like Elon Musk advocating for simulation theory, which basically means that we're not really here. We may have been created by a computer, a supercomputer, an artificial intelligence of some sort, and we're just playing through a video game. Okay, that is a lie. That is a lie from Satan, and you better not believe it, because I'm telling you right now, we were warned in the Bible repeatedly about this very thing. Be not deceived. And we also were told in the Bible that Satan wants to be like the Most High. Well, what did the Most High do? He created life. He created us. Okay? So don't believe this bullshit that we're in a simulation. That's just pure Satanism. Don't believe that shit. Don't fall for it for a minute. So that's it for this podcast. We'll be back with podcast number 8. I don't know when, but at some point in the not too distant future. In the meantime, we're going to watch the NASDAQ crash and take everyone's wealth right down the drain with them, and I'm going to get rich as hell watching it happen. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on episode number 8. Thank you.